When you spend so long trapped in darkness, you find that the darkness begins to stare back. Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. I'm your host, Ramia Amuddin, and behind the scenes, Nasreen Abdelmajid. We love to captivate you with this quote of the week right at the start of the show. And as we're 2 days away from Halloween, I thought might as well spook you out a little bit because that's just the plan with these cool, dark days. And you may have started a movie or two. You may have started out some of these terrifying, absolutely terrifying TV shows on your streaming services or cable TV. And they're just, they put you in a mood. And this quote put me in that mood in just one line. So shout out to Sarah J. Moss. And this quote was from A Court of Mist and Fury. So thank you for that. And that will be the end of our Fear Fest until next Halloween. Let's move on to the CELA homepage at a glance. This is from the Center for Equitable Library Access, and the featured titles is what we like to take a look at. The Winners by Frederick Bachman. This is a humorous fiction tale we haven't gotten to yet on our pause or play or otherwise checking it out. The second one is The Case of the Murderous Dr. Cream by Dean Jobb. True crime, Canadian fiction. If you're interested in that, just hold on a little longer. We will chat about it later in the show. Our Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng. Multicultural fiction, which we chatted about last week. And that was quite interesting to talk about because, well, I'm a fan of Celeste Ng, at least the one and only novel I read by her. And it was nice to get to know the second one. I want to talk really quickly to you, Nasreen, very quickly, to get your thoughts on whether or not you're staying away from all the horror stuff happening around Halloween, because we know you're not a fan.
Okay, so my friends have been trying to convince me to go to the Fear Fest
Halloween Haunt?
in Wonderland. Yeah.
Yes.
No,
Not happening.
no, no. You can keep dreaming. That's not gonna happen because I have a horror story that happened to me before, and I'm terrified. I'm truly terrified of clowns.
Oh no, not
Yeah,
clowns.
yeah. And I grew up in Sick Kids where they have clowns all over the place, like
Yes.
to make the kids smile. Yeah, that's not me.
I was gonna say, did they take a poll from the kids first to make sure they're not gonna freak out when they see the
Terrified?
clowns? Yeah.
I just, as a child, I felt uncomfortable a little bit. I wasn't a fan of clowns, but as I grew up more and more and I saw all the horror stories about clowns and everything like that, it just made me more terrified. And now I'm truly terrified because I can't do it. No.
I'm very curious about that. Like the actual percentage of people who are scared of clown versus finding them amusing, fun, entertaining. Because I
Yeah,
feel like
let's
it's
take a
almost a
poll.
50-50 divide. I really do. But anyways, okay. Well, thanks for indulging me, Nasreen, and going to bring in a special guest on AMI Audiobook Review very soon. Our friend and the manager of AMI Audio, Andy Frank, will be joining us, and long time no hear, Pause or Play is around the corner. This is AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks, and we're getting into Pause or Play. Now that this is a once-in-a-while feature, it's very, very exciting. And of course, we checked out some of the featured titles from the CELA Library website, their homepage. So let's get into 1 out of 3 of those. The Case of the Murderous Dr. Cream, The Hunt for a Victoria Aaron Serial Killer by Dean Jobb. This is a Canadian history and a true crime, so let's see if we're into it. When a doctor does go wrong, he's the first of criminals, Sherlock Holmes observed during one of his most puzzling murder investigations, and incredibly, at the time, the words of the world's most famous fictional detective appeared in print in the Strand magazine. A real-life Canadian doctor was stalking and murdering women in London's downtrodden Lambeth neighborhood. Dr. Thomas Neil Cream had been a suspect in the deaths of 2 women in Canada and had killed as many as 4 women in Chicago. But before he arrived in London in 1891, he began using pills laced with strychnine to kill prostitutes. And the Lambeth Poisoner, as he was dubbed in the press, became one of the most prolific serial killers in history. In this fascinating book, Dean Jobb reveals how bungled investigations, corrupt officials, and failed prosecutions allowed Cream to evade detection or freed him to kill again and again. The first completed account of Dr. Cream's crimes and his many victims explores how the stifling morality of and the hypocrisy of the Victorian era allowed this monster to poison vulnerable and desperate women, many of who've turned to him for medical help. Whew. It offers an inside account of Scotland Yard's desperate search for a killer as brazen and efficient as Jack the Ripper. Okay, let's take all that in and go around the table. Nisreen, starting with you, though I can predict if this is going to be a pause or play. Pause or play?
I would say play. I'm so invested. Are you
Took me
shocked
off
by my
guard there,
answer?
girl. Wow.
Yeah. Okay, listen to me. I can't do horror stories, but when it comes to like criminal mystery, solving
True crime.
crimes genres, true crime genres, I'm good with it. As you know, I watch a lot of those, and reading is a whole different story because they get into detail, and I'm all for it. Let's play.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if it's real and if it's juicy enough,
Yes.
the
Yes.
crime part of it is like back burner and you'll go through it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Play for Nisreen. Andy, for you. Pause or play?
I would play. My wife of many years has taught me to love everything to do with Sherlock Holmes, and yeah,
So you were grabbed at
I'm
the
in.
quote.
I'm grabbed with the quote. I'm grabbed with the patriotic angle. You know,
Yes.
the Canadian.
Yes.
So
Okay.
yeah, I'd play. How about you?
I'm definitely just one under obsessed of serial killer dramas and true crime to do with serial killers. So any of this is very intriguing to me. I usually go for documentaries or what do they call these now? Docudramas. But I'll take a book with true crime as well. I am curious if the very historical, like this is 1800s. I don't know if that'll pull me out as soon as I think I'm going to be interested, but we'll see. That's more of a language thing. Is it going to be as interesting written about such a old time? Because we're not really about the Canadian history, but depends. So if you're interested in checking it out after all our pause or plays, the case of the murderous Dr. Cream, the hunt for a Victorian era serial killer, is available. This is by Dean Jobb. It's available on the CELA Library, CELAlibrary.ca. Now, the voice that you heard is that of Andy Frank, and this is episode 61 for AMI Audiobook Review, and that's how long it took to bring on Andy Frank, the man who helped us imagine this podcast and bring it to life. So welcome, Andy, the manager of AMI Audio, to AMI Audiobook Review. Finally, thank you for coming on.
Well, it's an honor to be here, Ramya. It's 61. Yeah, that's also well over a year now.
Yeah.
And well into the second year, and it feels that way too. Like the shoe has been broken in, the leather is getting soft.
That's true. Yes, it's definitely starting to get like comfy.
Yeah.
It's very nice.
Yeah.
So you, like I said, you were there since the inception of AMI Audiobook Review, even if not on air, behind the scenes, helping us put it all together. And there's a lot of other things we're going to chat about today, like what's going on with audiobooks. But before that, I wanted to ask you how it feels, like the coverage of audiobooks on AMI in the last year with this podcast and with My Life in Books with Red Sail. How is it all feeling?
It feels good. It feels right. This show here talks about such a wide variety of different offerings. And at the end of the day, this is a curation show. This is a show that that helps listeners to make their next purchase or download from wherever they choose to download. And that's the purpose, really, of this particular program. And in Red's case, it's more a question of getting to know some authors that have been successful in publishing audiobooks, usually plural, usually multiple authors of pretty high renown, and getting more into their process. So it's a little more of almost a little more of an academic process than this show. So they have two different roles and two different purposes, and I think it's working well. And I hope to add to that because I think this is a genre that's very, very important for our audience.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it definitely is. And we know with the amount of community members who come on firsthand talking audiobooks on our show, and then just numbers out there with how many people subscribe to such mainstream products as Audible to listen to audiobooks. It's huge and it continues to get bigger. So one example of that is for the 10th straight year in 2022, the Audio Publishers Association annual sales survey has revealed double-digit increases in audiobooks, Andy. This is pretty awesome. So give us some of the details. We can chat more about it.
The Audio Publishers Association is a 28-member companies, pretty big companies that report to it, and they reported revenue gains of 25% in 2021, bringing the estimated industry total to $1.6 billion in sales. And that's just for that particular group. It's the pie is much bigger than that overall. But that was an increase that bested 12% in 2020. So 25% versus 12%. So like basically these increases are staggering. And this is basically an American thing. So the consumer survey indicated that 41% of listeners subscribe to at least one audiobook service, an increase of 38% reported in 2020.
Okay. I do want to say there, because you said it's an American thing, it reminded me, and I'm not sure if I let our listeners know, that I switched over to audible.ca this year. I don't know what made me make the switch, but I was on with an Audible like customer service agent, and they asked me, "Hey, you're not subscribed to audible.ca. Are you going to make the change?" I was like, "Yeah, why not?" So I'm finally Canadian serving with my audiobook listening. What genres did this publication tell you? What genres were the most popular?
Well, not surprisingly, science fiction and fantasy was the most popular category that they uncovered, and then mysteries, thrillers, and suspense came in a very close second. And then there was a category that made a really big jump, and it was the romance category with a
I'm
70.
surprised that's not first.
Nah, I know a 75% jump in revenues for that. Other other surveys that I researched showed that memoirs are actually on the top. So it kind of depends where you look, but this is one particular in-depth survey that showed that science fiction and fantasy was number one, mysteries number two, and then romance.
So compared to our own favorable genres, does this match yours?
No,
No.
I
No.
I am so not down with science fiction and fantasy. I couldn't care less. I do like some mysteries very much, and romance. Yeah, I'm out sort of kind of out of that game. I love memoirs. I
Okay.
love memoirs. So I'm right in that category myself.
Right. But here on the show, we have featured a lot of fantasy, a lot in the last 60 episodes. So I'm not surprised in that sense either. The pandemic, I think, made us all better readers, at least speaking for myself. How did it affect audiobook consumption?
A couple of really interesting things according to this survey. One of them says 61% of parents said their children between 17 and younger now listen to audiobooks compared with 49% reported in 2020. So that was a big jump from 49% to 61%. And they're attributing a lot of that to the fact that there were home studies and the pandemic just kept people locked in, basically. And this was an alternate way of getting entertainment. And especially because kids studying at home were burning out looking at screens now, not only watching TV at night or whatever, but also then all day at school on a screen. And the audiobook was a way of relieving that stress on the
Mm-hmm.
eyes. The other thing that was really interesting was that this switched the trend of listening to audiobooks in your car versus listening to it in your home, it kind of switched it around on its head. So now it said 55% of listeners said they listen more often at home versus 43% in 2021. So this is very recent information. So that's what the
Wow.
pandemic did. It brought audiobooks into the home.
Yes, and that part is quite interesting because then I wonder, what services are people utilizing to get these audiobooks into their homes, and also the age groups, right? Like you mentioned school and screen time and all of these other things that impact why people were going to audio, like leaning that way anyway. But age groups, and Nisreen, your sister, I believe, is still in school. So is my youngest brother. And he didn't pick up any reading, by the way. That's just shame on him. But but Nisreen's sister is a huge audiobook listener. So I'm curious about
Hmm.
that, the age group and people younger and younger turning to audiobooks rather than print or ebooks.
Yeah, she recently started to listen to audiobooks, but she always was a bookworm since she was little. But audiobook listening, I feel like that's very considered as very new to this
Still,
day.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, still with even all these numbers, I sometimes feel like I have to peel out of this, because I have low vision, I'm always listening to audiobooks, always tapping into other people listening to audiobooks all the time too. But then Andy, it proves it. These numbers prove that more people are listening. How many books were published? Let's go into that angle.
More than 71,000 audiobooks were
Whew.
published in 2020. That's 2020. That's now 2 years ago. But
Wow.
that was a 39% growth over the year before that, 2019. So that number must be closing in on 80,000. Can you imagine how many that is per week?
Yeah.
You're looking at about 1,500 books a week that are being published. So it's an incredible amount of content that's coming out. It's a torrent of content, and so yeah, it's showing that there is growth. And by the way, 56% of audiobook listeners are under the age of 45, Ramya. So you're in good company,
Mm,
56%. And
okay.
that's up from 52% in 2020. So that went up by 4% there. So the growth is happening in younger people. In fact, that is what's shown here as well. It's older people are
Yeah.
as typically, the my generation, the cable TV watchers are the slower ones on the uptick.
Wow. Yeah.
Don't forget that it's been promoted on all social media platforms now. I mean, we were
That's
talking
Yes.
about it a few
right.
episodes ago where it's trending on TikTok all the time about different what's trending, what audiobooks are trending, what books are trending lately, and they have a full-on category for that. So I think for it to be promoted on social media is a whole different um, era
Yep.
nowadays.
Mhm. Yep. And influence by influencers, celebrities, people putting up, instead of screenshots of their books and their chapters, now audio samples all over their Instagrams and TikToks on their audiobook releases, which is also fantastic because that real-time publication of audiobook and print book, we're getting closer and closer to most people doing that. You're no longer waiting longer to get your audiobook. So as
No.
soon as when you're thinking anticipating a book, you can put your audiobook on hold. Pretty
Yeah,
fantastic.
very much so. I remember speaking with an executive at Benetech, which is the platform that does so many of the libraries, like the SELA and so on, out of
Mhm.
California. And Betsy Bowman is her name, and she said their rule is that as soon as there's a new book published in print, it has to be available in audio
Yep.
form. That was 2 years ago that she mentioned that. So yeah, that's definitely happening.
Fantastic. Okay, couple more minutes left. We have Pew Research also has some interesting findings.
This is one that's interesting on demographics. Adults who have a bachelor's or advanced degree are more likely to be book readers, and also the same for audiobooks. But the other one that's really interesting is that audiobooks are trending a lot in adults with lower incomes and urban adults. They're picking up audiobooks at a very high clip these days. That was one of the things that Pew Research found out. Is so it's great. It's making literacy more accessible.
Right.
You know,
My mind went immediately to art too, Andy. We've talked so much about production of audiobook being more dramatized, being multicasted, that kind of thing. Many narrators versus one or duo narration and things like that, and how audiobooks feel different. They don't feel like straight reads or just
Right.
story time anymore. It feels like something more and something to sit with, which makes me think art. How about Canada? You mentioned a lot of this is from the US. Anything particular on our country?
Well, almost half of all Canadians listen to audiobooks in 2021, which is really cool. 45% of Canadians listen to audiobooks, and 19% of all Canadian book buyers bought an individual audiobook or accessed an audiobook through a subscription service in 2021. So they're pretty Canadians are pretty active in that area. So I thought that was really cool.
Mm-hmm. And it is, you didn't say that some of the top trends were like self-development and things like that, but I think that's just a classic way of getting into especially the one-off purchases. If you're thinking this book would be better as audio, um, perhaps you're leaning towards something more self-development, and there's tons of that on the market right now, especially with mental health and meditation and all these other things. Andy, before we wrap up, and thank you for all this information, but before we go, you got to give us a recommendation or two.
All right, I'm going to give you a couple of recommendations. I read infrequently. I'm an extremely busy person at work, and I'm not saying that in any
That's a nice way to say it. Yep.
martyrish kind of way, but it's just a fact. I'm, and then when I'm not working, I'm chilling in front of sports for the most part. So that's kind of my life. It's boring, but that's the way it is. So when do I read? I read when I go on vacation. And when I go on vacation, I'll sometimes read 5 or 6 books. And I do listen to audiobooks in the car from time to time. Yeah, that's kind of my lifestyle. So the 2 books that I want to focus on are a bit on the older side, but they're really, really, really good books. And one of them is the biography of Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones. It's called Life, and it is read by Johnny Depp and Joe Hurley, and also features Keith Richards. For anybody who's familiar with Keith, listening to him speak is an absolute delight. All the incredibly crazy life that he's led is present in his voice. He's one of these people, as soon as he opens his mouth, you go, oh my God, the history that's coming out just by everything he utters. And of course, Keith has been massively successful with the Rolling Stones, and he spills the beans on all kinds of things. He was, in prison for drug possession, and he was in tax exile in France, trying to run away from the bogeyman in England. He's had all kinds of addictions and everything, but at the same time, the writing is so lucid. It's
Oh.
beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful, and the guy is a terrific songwriter. So, I could say the same thing about Bob Dylan's work as well. They're just amazing writers. It's such an easy read, even though it's a thick tome
Mm.
or a lot of words in the on the audiobook side. So that's one of them. And the other one, oh, by the way, I got to read a quote if I have time to read one very quick quote from
Yeah.
a review from David Remnick of the New York Times about Keith Richards' book Life. He said, "A slurry romp through the life of a man who knew every pleasure, denied himself nothing, and never paid the price."
Wow. Woo!
A great quote there.
Sounds like the last 2 years of Walter White's life. Okay.
Pretty much. And Walter, well, we don't want to give away the end.
No,
No, we don't. No.
Go ahead.
The other one I want to talk about is Richard Wagamese, the late Richard Wagamese. He is a Canadian author, died in 2015 at the age of 61. Most known for that famous book about hockey that he wrote, Indian Horse. It's not about hockey, but it's hockey's at the center of it, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's stuck with a lot of Canadians. Is because our great game is involved there. But this Medicine Walk book by Richard Wagamese is an astonishingly beautiful book. It is a story of Franklin Starlight. He is called to visit his father, Eldon, at the age of 16, and he had the most fleeting of relationships with the man. But now, after years, after he finds Eldon after years of drinking and dying of liver failure in a small town flop house, and Eldon asks his son to take him into the mountains so he may be buried in the traditional Ojibwe manner. And what this particular book does is it documents that journey. And it's incredible. And what a magnificent writer Richard Wagamese was. And so Medicine Walk, if you liked Indian Horse, if you're familiar with Indian Horse, you will love Medicine Walk.
Amazing. Andy, thank you so much. 2 definite recommendations going into my list. Appreciate you coming on the show. It's, we don't often get you on here, but it's so wonderful to have you on. Thank you so much. And we'll get you back on sooner than another 60 episodes.
I'm good. 60 episodes is plenty. Like I said, I'm a busy guy.
Wow.
Wow. Okay.
We're too busy for you.
Rejected. No one's ever said that before.
I love you both, and you know that. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks, Andy. Andy Frank is the manager of AMI Audio, and that wraps up our episode of AMI Audiobook Review for this week. And until next time, happy audiobook listening.